Would you dare save a child in the middle of the woods, when you know for sure it's not human? In the winter of 1993, Warren Blake, a grieving father who had retreated into the woods of Idaho after losing his daughter, heard a cry in the snow, faint, high-pitched, not quite human. He followed it and found a small figure, nearly frozen to death. Without question, he brought it into his cabin and wrapped it in the only thing he had left from his daughter, an old wool scarf. The child came back to life, and from that night on, the forest changed. There was no wind, no owls, no deer tracks, just a silence so heavy, it felt like something, or someone, was watching. The next morning, the snow around his cabin had been pressed flat into a perfect circle. The back door, reinforced, not broken, but secured, as if someone was protecting them from the outside. Warren never called the town. He couldn't. This wasn't a child you could hand over to humans. What happened next is something few people know. A story recorded only in the lost forest journals of Piet. But in this video, you'll discover why that child came to Warren and not someone else. What the forest was really trying to say, and what a being from another world left behind that helped a broken heart beat again. Now I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Because if this story could reach you, maybe it can reach someone else who still believes. Leave a like if your heart's still pounding. Subscribe if you believe Bigfoot stories aren't just legends, but memories waiting to be shared. From the deepest part of the forest, warmest regards to you, wherever you are. This is not just a channel. It's the beginning of a community, one that listens when the forest speaks. The wind that night didn't howl. It didn't moan through the pine slats of the cabin or rattle the stovepipe like it used to in the heart of winter. It just waited, held its breath. The kind of silence that makes a man feel like he's trespassing in his own land. Warren Blake sat near the fire, boots thawing by the stove, back hunched over a book he wasn't really reading. His fingers hovered above the page, still, like the rest of the world outside that old wooden frame. For 2 winters now, the silence had been his only company. Not the peace kind, the heavy kind, the kind that doesn't soften, only settles. Piet National Forest in December wasn't made for men who'd lost daughters. Not with snow this thick, piling against windows like it was trying to bury memory itself. The moon hung somewhere high but dimmed behind a weight of clouds, and every branch outside drooped heavy with snow, bent like old men in prayer. Then it came, soft, sharp, thin as a wire, but so out of place, it might as well have been a scream. Warren froze, mid-breath. A sound. No, not quite a sound, not the kind made by anything he knew. It was high and fractured, like glass humming on the edge of a break, like a child crying. But not. There was something off about it, something that didn't fit the register of a human throat. It wasn't the sound that pulled him to his feet. It was the space between the cries, the pause that said, "No one is coming." He grabbed the oil lantern and stepped out onto the porch. The snow swallowed every step like a secret. Windless, breathless cold. Even the trees seemed to lean in, listening. The porch creaked under his boots, and the glass of the lantern flickered against the dark like a heartbeat. That sound again, farther this time, but not by much. Maybe 100 yards, near the edge of where the tree line thickened past the clearing. He didn't think, didn't dress heavier. No rifle, just the lantern and the urgency thudding in his chest. His breath hung around him in short, shivering bursts. Every step forward was a choice he didn't have time to consider. The snow got deeper, up to his knees. Near the edge of the pines, the light from his lantern caught something unusual. Indented snow, pressed deep, like something had lain there, or crawled. A long, uneven trail, weaving but deliberate, like it had dragged itself. He followed, and then, there, a shape. Small, curled in on itself near the base of a cedar, half buried under frost and falling snow. At first he thought it was a bundle of old fur, abandoned. But then the lantern light caught a flash of skin beneath the matted coat, bluish, trembling. Tiny fingers, not paws, curled into its own chest, thin fur iced over. The whole thing no larger than a toddler, but wrong in proportion. The limbs longer, the face almost. Warren dropped to his knees. Its breath was shallow. Or maybe that was his own he heard. He didn't speak. What words could you say to something like that? He reached out, hands shaking. The moment his fingers touched its shoulder, a shiver. Not recoil, not fear, just response. Still alive. He scooped it up, arms tightening around a body colder than anything he'd ever held, and turned back toward the cabin. His boots crunched fast now, panic rising with every step. Snow slapped at his legs, lantern swaying. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't going to make it long in this cold. And Warren didn't think. He didn't wonder what it was, or if he should be afraid. He only knew one thing: it was dying, and he had to save it. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around him like a memory. He laid the small body down on the rug in front of the stove, turned the lantern higher, and crouched beside it. Its face was half covered in frost and tangled fur. But beneath that, a child. Not human, but a child. Warren unwrapped the scarf from his neck and laid it over its chest. Then he reached for the soft flannel blanket, the one he hadn't touched in months, the one that still held the faintest trace of baby powder and wood smoke, like his daughter had left it folded just yesterday. The creature didn't move, didn't stir. Warren pressed his palms to its tiny limbs, began rubbing them gently, trying to coax blood back, trying to warm it from the outside in. He moved to the kitchen shelf, grabbed the small tin of balm, the one he'd used when Leah had burned her hand on the fire grate, and rubbed it along the creature's joints. Ankles, wrists, chest. Still no sound, still no fight. He hesitated, then pulled the woolen scarf from the old trunk by the window. His daughter's scarf, soft pink with frayed ends. He'd kept it because of the way it smelled, because of the way it used to warm her when she curled in his lap after sledding. He wrapped it now around the creature's chest, holding it close, pressing it in. For a long time, nothing. The fire popped. The wind outside, if it was out there at all, didn't say a word. And then, a shudder, the tiniest rise of its chest beneath the wool. Then again, deeper, a sharp inhale, then a wet gasp. A sound pulled from deep inside a throat not made for winter. Warren leaned closer. The creature's eyes opened, amber, wide, ringed in a thin film of frost. Not scared, just surprised. They stared at each other. Not man and beast, just two survivors in the same cabin, in the same forest, in the same storm. Warren didn't speak, didn't need to. The fire spoke for him. The scarf spoke for him. The silence, for once, was not lonely. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, as if to hush the world and make room for something sacred. And inside, in that fragile space between one breath and the next, something was handed from one soul to another. Something wordless, something older than language, a promise. He stayed beside it until dawn. Not because he was afraid it would die, but because for the first time in 2 winters, something in the cabin wanted to live. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. But even as the first pale light began to press against the frozen windows, Warren didn't move. The creature had fallen asleep again, not from cold this time, but from safety. He watched it breathe, small, steady, warm, and in that steady rhythm, something inside Warren broke loose. Not a sob, not yet, but the memory of what it meant to hold something fragile and know that it trusted you. He didn't know what it was, didn't know what it would need, but he knew what he would do. He would keep it warm. He would keep it safe, and come what may, he would not let it go. The snow drifted deeper outside, but the forest no longer felt silent. It felt like it was listening. And that, somehow, was the beginning of everything. The fire had dimmed by the time Warren stirred again. Its glow softened into a sleepy orange pool across the rug. The storm outside had not let up, but dawn was crawling slow and pale behind the clouds, barely managing to silver the frost at the corners of the windows. Inside, it was still, thick with warmth and breath. He hadn't left the spot beside the creature since bringing it in. Hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken. He'd only listened, not to the snow or the wind, but to the faintest signs of life beneath the pink wool scarf pressed against the small chest. A flutter, a rasp, then a shiver, too gentle to shake the floor, but enough to say, something is still fighting. He reached out slowly, like he would have to Leah on the nights her fever ran high. His fingers brushed the edge of the creature's hand. Not a paw, not quite human. Long, with thick pads beneath and skin that felt too thin for this world. Ice had begun to melt along the fur, dampening the blanket beneath it. He took another cloth from the chair, folded it gently, and dabbed away the water. He worked without thought, but not without care. Every movement had a rhythm. Not the routine of duty, but of memory, of instinct coming back after too long buried. He pulled the heavy wool blanket tighter, then hesitated. His eyes flicked to the old trunk by the stove. For a long time he didn't move, but then his body did, before his mind had the chance to stop it. The hinges creaked, the lid lifted, and there it was, still folded where he'd left it 2 years ago. Leah's last winter scarf, pale pink, soft as breath, with faint lint still clinging to the ends. He held it in both hands like it might crumble, pressed it to his face. The scent was mostly gone now, but not entirely. It still carried the memory of her skin, of warmth and innocence, of afternoons that had no shadows. He brought it back, wrapped it carefully around the creature's chest, tucking it close under the chin. The scarf dwarfed the child's frame. Because yes, that's what he was calling it now, a child, because there was no other word that fit. But it looked right there, as if it belonged, as if Leah had left it behind for this very moment. He placed one hand gently over its ribs. Beneath his palm, the skin was warming. Still too cold, but less so than before. The breathing, though shallow, had grown steadier. He reached for the jar of salve again, warmed it by the fire, and rubbed it over the creature's arms and legs in slow, careful strokes. The thin fur was patchy in places, clumped with ice near the joints. The skin underneath was a pale grayish pink, not unlike frost-bitten flesh, but not dead. Not yet. He worked quietly, murmuring once under his breath without even knowing it, a sound that wasn't quite a word but carried weight, something between apology and prayer. Then, with the last smear of balm spread across the small back, he sat back on his heels, watched, waited. The child's eyes opened, not wide, not panicked, just slowly, like waking wasn't something new. Amber again, luminous but not glowing, eyes that reflected the firelight in them like water holding stars. They blinked once, twice, then held him in their gaze. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The moment didn't ask for sound. It asked for stillness, for honesty. The child's head moved slightly, just enough to tilt toward him. Their expression was not confusion. It was something stranger, something deeper. Recognition. Like it knew somehow that it was safe here. Not safe because of shelter or heat, but because of him. Warren exhaled through his nose, slow and steady, trying not to overwhelm the moment. He dipped his head slightly, like greeting a skittish animal, but not out of pity, out of respect. A greeting between equals, one survivor to another. The fire popped again, and the creature flinched barely, but didn't look away. Its gaze never left his. Warren reached slowly to the corner, pulled the small flannel pillow Leah had used when she was sick, tucked it gently beneath the child's head, then rose to fetch a basin of warm water from the stove, returned, and cleaned the small fingers and face with a soft cloth. The child let him. Not limp, not stiff, just calm, present. Afterward, Warren sat back on the rug, cross-legged, not too close. The scarf around the creature's chest shifted slightly as it breathed. He stared at that soft wool, at the way it rose and fell in tiny movements, and his chest ached with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. He'd forgotten what it felt like to care about something that still had a chance. The storm outside was beginning to ease. Light shifted at the windows, pale and broken, but persistent. Snow still fell, but it seemed gentler now, as if something had changed. He leaned back against the chair, the stiffness in his spine reminding him how long he'd gone without rest. The child's eyes drifted shut again. Not from pain now, not from cold, from warmth, from the kind of peace that only comes when danger is finally behind. He dozed in and out for a time, waking whenever the fire cracked too loudly or the wind scratched a little too sharply against the glass. But each time he opened his eyes, the child was still there, still breathing, still holding on. And Warren, he began to understand something deep in his bones. This wasn't just a creature that had wandered in from the woods. This was a life that had been handed to him. He stood finally, legs stiff, and moved to the small stove, boiled water, poured it into a mug. He stood there with his hands around the heat for a long while, eyes flicking back toward the child as if it might vanish if he looked away too long. Then he returned, placed the mug down on the side table, and sat again. He didn't say anything, just watched the fire burn, felt the warmth soak into his skin, heard the quiet rise and fall of breath beside him. Outside, the snow had begun to taper off. The sky was turning a dusky blue-gray. The forest was still, but no longer hollow, no longer empty. The child stirred again. A small sound, not a cry, not a word, but something soft and alive. It shifted beneath the scarf, blinked slowly, and let its eyes rest on him once more. It didn't smile. It didn't speak. But it didn't need to. Warren nodded once, barely moving. That was enough. He didn't know where this was going. Didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or what kind of world this child came from. But tonight, in this cabin, surrounded by snow and silence and the ghosts he'd tried to bury, something had changed. Something had begun. He stood once more, stoked the fire, added another log. The child's eyes followed him briefly, then closed again, trusting, and for the first time since Leah's laughter had left the walls of this cabin, Warren Blake felt something stir inside him that he hadn't expected to feel again. Hope. Not loud, not bright, but warm, and breathing, and real. Outside, the snow stopped falling. The wind didn't return. The forest simply waited. Not as a threat, but as witness, and in that hush, a new sound took root. Not crying, not silence, just the slow, steady rhythm of two heartbeats in a place that had forgotten the sound of life. And if you listened close enough, you might have heard the first sigh of spring stirring somewhere beneath the ice. The wind didn't howl that night either. It didn't moan or crack like it used to when snow hit the pine canopy too fast. No branches swayed, no limbs groaned. The world just went still, like it had turned off a switch. And the Warren noticed it first in his chest, not his ears. That kind of quiet. It doesn't come gradually. It falls, heavy and instant, like a wall of glass settling between him and the rest of the forest. He had been sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low, the child curled up on the thick rug near the stove. It had eaten a few pieces of cooked squash earlier, sipped water without hesitation. It hadn't made a sound since waking. Didn't fuss, didn't explore. It stayed close to the fire, always with that same quiet watchfulness, like it was waiting for something. Or someone. Warren had just leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting shut for what felt like the first real rest in weeks, when it hit him. The quiet. Not inside but outside. It wasn't that the wind had died down. It was that everything had. The normal creaks of the forest, the tapping of snow sliding off branches, the distant cracks of ice on the far creek, all of it gone. As if the land itself had drawn a long breath and now refused to let it out. He stood slowly, boots padding across the wood floor in careful steps. He didn't want to wake the child. Not because it was fragile. It didn't feel that way anymore. But because something about its sleep felt sacred, borrowed, like he had to protect it, even from being disturbed. He eased the front door open just a crack. Cold crept in like a breath held too long. The oil lamp in his hand flickered against the edge of the dark. The clearing outside was glass still. Moonlight pressed down over the snow, revealing nothing unusual at first. But then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. The snow around the cabin was no longer untouched. At some point during the last hour, maybe two, someone, something, had walked a full circle around the house. Not just a track or two. A perfect, quiet loop. The snow was packed in a ring, the indentations deep, as if whatever had walked there was heavy, deliberate. The path circled wide, maybe 20 feet out, and never once veered off course. Not a stumble, not a pause. Warren's breath caught at the back of his throat. He didn't step outside, he didn't call out, he only watched. And it wasn't just the prints. The silence had teeth now. It pressed in from every direction. No owl hoots, no rustle of distant deer, not even the normal clatter of the stovepipe expanding in the cold. It felt like he had slipped into something else. A room between rooms. A waiting place. He stepped back inside, closed the door without a sound, let the lantern flames settle. His eyes flicked toward the child, still asleep, still curled with the scarf close against its chest, knees drawn up tight beneath the blanket like it had always known how to keep itself warm. But even in sleep, the child's head turned slightly, as if it had heard something, or felt it. Warren knelt beside the fire again. He didn't feed it just yet, didn't want the extra crackle. He just sat there back hunched, hands clasped between his knees, eyes fixed on the floorboards. He'd lived out here long enough to know the woods weren't always kind, but they had always been honest. Predators marked their presence with sound. Wolves barked warnings, cats screamed, bears huffed and paced. But this was different. This was something that didn't need to be loud to be known, something that watched and waited, something that understood silence better than he did. He didn't sleep much that night. At some point, maybe near dawn, he must have drifted off in the chair because the next thing he knew, light had begun to creep in through the window and the fire had died down to quiet coals. The child was still there, but sitting up now, awake. Its small back was to him, the scarf still draped loosely across its shoulders. It didn't turn, didn't speak, just stared at the closed front door with an expression that could have been listening or remembering. He stood slowly, knees stiff, and walked past it toward the door. Hand on the knob, he hesitated again. Then he opened it wide this time. Snow glittered in the daylight, and the full circle was clearer now. Not just one trail. Two, one broader, deeper, the other smaller but sharper, with a different stride pattern. Not human, not any animal he knew. The prints encircled the cabin, then vanished back into the trees. But it wasn't just the footprints that stopped him cold. The back door latch had been shifted. Not broken, not forced, just moved. A small wooden bar Warren always set from inside before bed. He checked it without thinking, every night, part of a rhythm too deep to notice, was no longer flush across the door. It had been lifted, tilted, corrected, as if someone had seen it loose and thought to fix it for him. He stepped back from the frame, closed it slowly, then turned toward the child, who was now watching him with those same amber eyes. Steady, unreadable, calm in a way that unnerved him more than if it had screamed. He crouched down to its level. "You remember any of that?" he asked softly. Not expecting an answer, it didn't nod, didn't move, but after a beat, it reached down and adjusted the scarf across its chest, just a little, then looked back at the fire. He didn't press. He didn't need to. That morning, he stepped outside long enough to check the perimeter. No fresh tracks, no signs of animals. Just the ring, perfectly packed, now starting to crust with sunlight and time. He didn't mention it in the notebook he sometimes kept on the table. Didn't write it down. Some things didn't need records. They needed reverence. He spent most of the day indoors. Cooked. Kept the stove going. The child seemed to grow more comfortable in the space, though it still kept near the heat. At one point, it moved to the window seat. That small bench Leah used to lay on when the storms got too loud and she wanted to feel safe while still watching the trees. The child fit there almost perfectly. Legs drawn up, eyes fixed outward. By late afternoon, the silence outside began to crack again. Birdsong in the far edge of the tree line. A squirrel skittering across the roof. Warren felt his shoulders drop a little, his breath come easier. But the print ring stayed. He didn't step past it. Not yet. That night he checked the doors twice, drew the bolt across both front and back, moved the small oak chair in front of the kitchen door just to feel like something had weight again. But it wasn't fear that kept him awake. It was awareness that there were eyes out there, watching. Not with hunger, but with thought, with memory. He sat in the rocker long after the child had fallen asleep again, the soft glow of the stove painting the walls gold and quiet. And for the first time since she died, Warren thought about Leah not as gone, but as something he still carried. Not in grief, but in habit, in warmth, in the scarf now wrapped around another child, breathing steady on his rug. Outside, somewhere past the trees, the forest exhaled, and something ancient walked away, not because it was finished, but because it had seen what it needed to see, and the snow held its silence like a secret worth keeping. He didn't sleep easy, but he didn't sleep alone. Not anymore, and somewhere past the edge of the firelight, the circle in the snow remained, waiting, marking, reminding, like a covenant drawn not in blood, but in trust. And that trust was being watched, tested, and, for now, honored. The snow didn't melt, but it softened. Just enough to let the sun spill across the porch rail in the morning like it was trying to remember how to be warm again. Warren stood in the doorway, hands wrapped around his chipped coffee mug, the kind Leah once painted a tiny heart on with nail polish before it wore off. He didn't sip. He just watched the clearing, listened to the trees for the sound of deer, of wind, of anything that meant the forest was breathing like it used to. Behind him, the child shifted, still bundled in layers of flannel and wool, still silent, but different now. Stronger in the way it moved, steadier in how it held its little frame, no longer trembling, no longer only surviving. Its eyes followed the light across the floor like a cat watching sunbeam trails, blinking slow, then closing, then opening again with calm curiosity. Warren turned, leaned against the doorframe, and watched. The scarf was still wrapped around the child's small chest, his daughter's scarf. And somehow, the pale pink didn't seem out of place anymore. It belonged. Not as a symbol of loss, but as something carried forward, something remembered without breaking. The cabin didn't feel crowded. That was strange. It had always felt too full of memory. Every drawer had something Leah touched, every shelf a story Mae Whitlow still remembered. And yet, with this new presence here, this tiny, quiet creature with amber eyes and an impossible past, there was room. Warren didn't go into town that week. Not even when the weather cleared enough to make the trip down the ridge feel manageable. He had supplies, dried beans, rice, a couple jars of venison stew. May would understand. She always had a way of sending what he needed before he realized he needed it. And sure enough, by Wednesday, a note arrived. Not a phone call, not a knock. Just a small envelope wedged in the split of the woodpile, held there by a stone. Warren knew that stone. Leah had once used it to mark the boundary of her pretend garden. The envelope was thin. Inside, "Warren, storm's coming Friday. You're likely low on salt. Bring down what you've got to trade. I'll wait till late. M." He folded the paper slow, slipped it in the top drawer with the others she'd sent over the years. Letters like those had held him together through the first season of silence, when grief still left fingerprints on every window pane. But this time, he didn't read it twice. He didn't lace his boots or prep the sled. He looked back at the child, who now sat on the bench by the window, knees pulled up, hands resting lightly in its lap. It was watching the trees again, the same way it had the morning the prince had vanished from the snow. Warren watched too, then sat down in the old chair across from it. "Not gonna leave you," he said softly, just to himself. Not even for salt. He didn't know if the child understood English. Maybe it did. Maybe it understood in the way deer know when a hunter's weapon isn't raised. Not the words, the intention. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, letting the silence settle between them like a shared blanket. Around midday, he stepped out to grab firewood. Just a few logs. Didn't go far. When he returned, something caught in his chest. The front door was closed, bolted. From the inside, he reached for the latch, surprised to find it stuck. Then knocked once, twice, confused but not afraid. He jiggled the handle, unsure how much pressure to use. And then the door opened. Just a crack, and there it was. The child, standing on tiptoe, tiny fingers still wrapped around the inside latch. It had locked the door. Warren stared, breath stilled, not because it had learned how, but because it had chosen to keep them safe. The latch clicked again from the inside, the door swung wide open, and the child stepped back, head tilted slightly, like it had done something ordinary, like this was just how things worked when you lived together. Warren stepped in slowly, snow clinging to the soles of his boots. He closed the door behind him, not bothering with the latch this time. The child had already done it. That night, he didn't light the lamp early. Let the cabin grow dim with the coming dusk. The child sat by the fire with its blanket wrapped around its shoulders. He cooked simple. Potatoes, a few strips of smoked trout, boiled over the stove. When it was ready, he brought 2 bowls to the floor, sat cross-legged on the rug. The child watched him eat for a while, then picked up its spoon awkwardly. The grip was strange, like it wasn't used to tools, but the motion was careful, intentional. Halfway through the meal, Warren paused, watched it chew slow, blink, then set the spoon down. It reached for the scarf again, not to remove it, just to touch it, hold it close. That's when he knew. It remembered, not his daughter. No, it wasn't that. But it remembered what it meant to feel warm, to be held, to not be afraid. And he understood that kind of memory didn't need a language. It just needed time. He stayed up late that night, reading by the stove, the book open on his lap, more as habit than purpose. The child slept again on the rug, curled in the same position Leah used to, knees in, hands under cheek, scarf tucked up under chin. At some point past midnight, Warren got up to check the back door. Not because he heard anything, just because. The latch was untouched, no new prints outside, no fresh wind, just the hush of snow settling into itself again. He stood there a while, one hand resting on the door frame, the other tucked in his coat. The night wasn't empty. It never was, not really. It was just listening, waiting, and for the first time in years, Warren felt something open up inside him, not loud, not sudden, but steady, like a slow thaw deep in the soil, the kind that meant spring might come again, even if it took its time. And he didn't want to leave the cabin anymore, not for salt, not for company, not even for answers, because what he had now, it wasn't just survival, it was trust. And trust once given freely, was a thing worth guarding with everything you had, even if you didn't know how long it would stay, even if it came in the shape of something the world wasn't ready to name. And as he sat back down in the rocker and listened to the child's breathing rise and fall with the rhythm of the stove's quiet pulse, Warren knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. And even if no one else ever knew what had come through the trees that night in the snow, he would carry it. Day by day, silently, carefully. The same way the child had learned to lock the door. Not out of fear, but because it had decided this place was worth protecting. And that, maybe, was all the proof Warren needed. That somewhere out there, something had changed, and whatever this was between them, it was real, even if it had no name yet. The forest had begun to speak again, not in words, but in signs that Warren could read even in sleep. The soft drumming of pine needles on snow, the hush of a deer's passing, a rustle where the wind curved through frozen alder branches, hinting at motion just beyond the edge of sight. But it wasn't noise that woke him that night. It was the opposite, an absence, sudden and sharp, like a breath cut short in the dark. He sat up before he understood why, eyes adjusting to the dim orange pulse of the stove. The child was still there, curled against the woven rug, breathing steady, one small hand resting atop the scarf like it had every night since that first thaw in its chest. But something outside had shifted. Not danger, not yet, but change. He pulled on his coat without lighting the lantern, stepped onto the porch with bare hands, letting the cold bite at his knuckles as if to make sure this was real. And it was. Even before his eyes adjusted to the milky dark, he saw them, two shapes near the tree line, darker than the trees themselves, standing still, not hiding, just waiting. He didn't move. They didn't either. One taller than the other, both unmoving, black as bark, but wrong in shape. Too upright, too still. The taller figure swayed once, just slightly, as if rocked by wind, though the trees weren't moving. Warren stared until his eyes watered, until the cold bled through his boots, until the breath in his chest locked tight with the weight of knowing. They had come. He didn't know how he knew it, but he did. This wasn't chance. This wasn't some animal wandering near a warm home. This was a reckoning, a return. But they didn't approach. They didn't even lift their arms. They stood there like sentinels, like statues, watching. Warren stepped back inside, shut the door without a sound. He turned the lock but didn't feel safer, just more aware. Morning didn't bring answers, only more quiet. The kind of quiet that made snow seem heavier than it was. The child woke before Warren did, already sitting at the window by the time he stirred from the chair. It didn't look at him. It looked past the trees, out where the shadows had been, where they might still be. He didn't ask if it knew, didn't try to explain what he'd seen. There was nothing to say that wouldn't flatten the truth. He just made coffee, toasted some stale bread, placed a slice on a napkin and left it near the child without a word. The day moved like a dream, half wrapped in smoke from the stove, half lost in the silver drift of snowflakes that never stuck long. The world felt paused, like someone was holding their finger above a piano key, waiting to decide whether to play or stop. Late that afternoon, he stepped out to bring in firewood from the lean-to. He didn't expect anything different, but there it was. In front of the porch, carefully arranged in the snow, 3 sticks, no longer than a man's forearm, placed tip to tip, forming an arrow. Not a crude one, not random, a message. It pointed east, toward the creek bed that had run dry 3 winters ago, where Leah once slipped on black ice and bruised her ribs so bad she couldn't laugh for a week. He stared at it for a long time, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a challenge. It was direction. And something deeper than language stirred in his gut. A weight, a certainty. They didn't want to come closer. They wanted him to move. Not far, but somewhere specific. He bent slowly, touched the middle stick. It was warm, barely, but not from sun, from something else, something living. Back inside, he didn't say anything. He sat by the fire, lit the lamp as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The child joined him without prompting, small hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm broth. It didn't speak, but its shoulders were different tonight. Set, waiting. He cleared his throat once. They were here. The child blinked. He tried again, softer this time. 2 of them, last night, just watching. A pause. I think they want you to come. Still no words, but its gaze held his. And I think they want me to bring you. He didn't expect an answer. He didn't get one. But the way the child didn't look away, that was enough. That night he packed quietly. Not much, just a blanket, a small pack with dried food, an old canteen. He tucked the scarf tighter around the child's neck and didn't ask if it wanted to keep it. That was its choice now. They left before dawn. The snow had stopped falling. The moon hung low, bruised and yellow over the ridgeline, and every footstep crunched louder than it should have. He carried the child for a while, not because it was tired, but because the snow was deep and his pace was steadier. The trees thinned as they reached the edge of the old creek. What had once been a wide, fast stream was now a frozen ditch, half covered in drift. But it still whispered beneath the ice. Slow water, not dead, just sleeping. He set the child down gently near a wide sandbar where the snow crusted thinner. The arrow had pointed here, and here they were. He waited. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, a sound, not loud, just the creak of ice shifting beneath slow weight. He turned, and there, from the edge of the trees, came a shape, larger than anything Warren had ever stood near. Not rushing, not growling, just stepping forward on long, silent legs, like a shadow deciding to become real. It stopped 15 feet away. It didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there. Its eyes, not glowing but bright, met his, and didn't blink. Warren's knees tensed, but he didn't run, didn't move. The child, beside him now, stepped forward once, then once more, but not toward the figure, toward the creek. Warren's boots slipped slightly as he turned, caught on a patch of melting crust. He leaned for balance, just enough to feel his weight pitch forward. Then, a motion, sudden, huge. The figure's arm reached out, not toward the child, but toward a low-hanging branch near Warren. Its hand brushed the ice-slicked limb, steadying it, pressing it down so Warren could grab hold, catch his footing. It had helped him, not to save him, just to steady him. He exhaled, shaky, unsure what part of his body had gone coldest, but not from fear. The gesture had been small, but deliberate, and it cracked something open inside him that had been sealed tight since the first night in the cabin. He didn't speak. Neither did the creature. The child stepped forward now, one step more, then paused. Warren didn't call it back, didn't move forward either. He just stood there, breath steaming in the morning frost, hands loose at his sides. The creek creaked again, water moved beneath. Everything else held its breath, and the world for a moment aligned. Not in peace, not yet, but in balance, and that was enough. For now, he didn't know what came next, but the forest did, and whatever happened after this moment, whatever choice the child made next, it was no longer just his to make, and that knowing, that quiet surrender, was its own kind of freedom. The creek was louder today, not because it had thawed, not fully, but because the ice had begun to speak. Warren could hear it from the cabin, that long, aching crack of surface strain and shifting weight, a brittle song echoing from the ravine below the ridge. He stood by the window for a long time, hand resting on the sill, steam rising from the untouched mug beside him. The morning was gray, low clouds scraping across the pines like something searching. He hadn't slept much. Neither had the child. It had been up before dawn, pacing slow along the edge of the rug, its movements careful but purposeful, like it was remembering something with its whole body. It had stopped once at the front door, just stood there with its fingers grazing the wood. Then it sat by the fire again, holding the scarf like a small bird in its lap, eyes blinking slow as if watching a place far away. Warren didn't speak. There wasn't anything left to ask. Not after what he'd seen. The arrow in the snow had pointed east, and the dry creek was east. Not far. 2 miles, maybe less. The snow had softened just enough in the last few days to make it walkable if they moved slow. He packed what he could, not much. Some water, a knife, a folded piece of canvas. He wrapped the child in a thicker coat, one that had belonged to Leah when she was 10, though the sleeves were still long for its arms. The scarf stayed around its neck. It never let go of that. They set out mid-morning. Warren carried the pack on his back and the child in his arms for the first stretch. The snow crunched thinly beneath his boots, leaving narrow prints behind them like breadcrumbs in a world that didn't believe in fairy tales. No wind, just silence. The kind that made every breath feel too loud. The path narrowed past the hollow tree Leah had once called the castle. From there, the slope dipped gently toward the old wash, a wide, gravel-bottomed channel now half covered in sheets of fractured ice and broken twigs. The banks were steeper than Warren remembered. Snow had drifted against one side in long humps, smoothing over rocks and roots alike. He lowered the child onto a patch of firmer ground. Its small feet crunched once, then stilled. They stood together, side by side, at the edge of the creek. Water moved sluggishly beneath the ice, slow but not frozen. A reminder that some things keep moving even when the surface says they shouldn't. Warren pointed to a patch farther down the bank, where a tree had fallen years ago and left a stretch of shallow, exposed gravel. The snow was thinner there, and the ice looked old, cracked already, spider-webbed and melting from beneath. They walked in silence. Every few steps, the child would glance behind them. Warren didn't ask why. When they reached the sandbar, something shifted. Not in the wind, not in the light, but in the air itself. A presence, a tension, like being watched by something that wasn't trying to hide. Warren looked up. There, just beyond the line of trees across the creek, a shadow moved. He didn't flinch. It didn't either. It stood still. He couldn't make out the face. Too far, too dim. But the size was unmistakable. Not the one from before. This one was broader. Still. Arms like tree trunks, shoulders sloped low. It didn't move. Just watched. The child saw it too. It didn't run. It stepped forward, one foot, then another, crunching ice beneath it. It moved toward the center of the creek where the water ran dark and shallow. Warren reached out instinctively, but stopped. The child didn't slip. It knelt, right there on the frozen edge, where water gurgled slow and clear beneath a broken sheet of melting ice. There was something there. A fish, a salmon, frozen in place just beneath the surface. Its body caught between motion and stasis. Its gills twitched once. A second time. It was alive. Barely. The child leaned forward, its hands pressed gently into the snow, not reaching for the fish, just listening, breathing. Warren stepped closer, not wanting to intrude, but unable to look away. The air was colder here, still. Then, crack. A thin line tore across the ice near the fish's body. Another one splintered outward like lightning in slow motion. The child didn't move. Warren's foot shifted. His balance faltered. The ice beneath him sloped inward. Slick. He slipped. One foot jerked sideways. His knee buckled. He reached out. No time to catch himself. But something caught him. A hand. Huge. From behind. Wrapped around a tree limb that had been bracing overhead. Now pushed down. Steady. Like someone had held it in place just for him. He caught the branch. Regained his footing. Looked back. And there, behind him, Half-shadowed in the trees, stood the same figure. Silent, still. But its arm was extended. It had helped. Not by stepping in, not by taking over, just by being there. By offering a steadiness he hadn't asked for. The child turned its head, eyes wide, breath fogging in short, visible bursts. But it didn't look afraid. Not anymore. Warren stepped back onto the bank. The fish beneath the ice twitched again, then moved, slid forward, alive. The water bubbled around it, faint but clear. The child rose slowly. It didn't smile, but its whole posture said something had changed. Something had been received, not taken, not forced. Returned, it walked back to Warren's side. Didn't reach for his hand, didn't speak, just stood there. And together, they watched as the shadow in the trees turned, slow and heavy, and walked away. Not fast, not hidden, just back into the woods, one step at a time, snow parting gently beneath each footfall. The creek murmured behind them. The fish was gone. And something else had shifted, something deeper than words. He didn't know what that act had meant. That small, deliberate helping hand. But he felt it, in his chest, in the silence between heartbeats. That was trust, not asked for, but answered anyway. He gathered the child into his arms again, not because it needed carrying, but because he needed to carry it. The walk back was quiet. Snow fell again, lighter this time. By the time the cabin came into view through the trees, the air felt changed, like something had passed through. Not danger, not relief, just a knowing. A shared breath between two worlds that no longer feared each other. The fire was still warm inside, the scarf still soft. The silence no longer felt alone. It felt like listening, and Warren knew nothing was finished, but something sacred had begun. Warren didn't sleep the night before. He lay in the chair by the fire, eyes half shut but never letting go. The kind of wakefulness that sits under the skin. Not anxious, not restless, just present. The child was curled in its usual place, small breaths rising and falling against the scarf that now looked like it had always been there. The fire burned low, licking gently at the logs like it too had grown quieter over time. There was no storm outside, no fresh snow, just cold, steady, and unblinking. And in the silence, something had settled between them. A readiness, a weight that couldn't be ignored anymore. By morning he knew. He moved slow, like he didn't want the walls to notice. Packed only what mattered. An old blanket, a sliver of smoked meat, a tin cup. He didn't bring the rifle. Didn't bring the compass either. The trees would show the way. They always had. The child watched him move without asking. It stood up on its own now, steadier than before, silent as it had always been. Warren knelt to button the coat around its chest, tucking in the sleeves. The scarf stayed. Of course it did. He adjusted it gently, one hand brushing the edge of the worn wool. The fabric was faded, threadbare in places, but the smell still lingered if you got close enough. Cedar smoke, baby powder, something soft and gone. He stayed there, kneeling, eyes level with the child's. "You knew this day would come," he said softly. It didn't answer, didn't need to. Its eyes, those amber eyes, looked straight through him, but not in a distant way, in a knowing way. Like it understood things the way trees do, slow, certain, without explanation. Warren swallowed. "I don't own you. You weren't mine to keep, but I'm glad you were here." The child reached up, not fast, not dramatic, just gentle, and placed one hand against his shoulder. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Then it stepped back, and slowly unwrapped the scarf from its neck. Warren's chest tightened. The child held it for a moment, looking down, not at the cloth, but at its weight maybe. Then it stepped forward, held it out, and pressed it into Warren's hand. He stared at it, didn't take it at first. But the child didn't move, just waited. He took it, fingers closing slowly over that faded pink wool. The last thing Leah ever wore before the fever took her. The scarf that had wrapped around something not human, but alive. Not his, but somehow part of him now. The child looked up at him, not with goodbye in its face, but with something else. Gratitude. A quiet, sacred thank you that didn't need voice. The scarf was not just a return. It was a gesture of care, of choosing to give back something it knew mattered. A circle closing, a door opening. He stood. They walked together, side by side, out into the snow. There were no fresh tracks this time, no arrows drawn from sticks. Just the faint impression of a trail left by something older than maps. The trees parted more easily than they should have. The air was still, cold, but not cruel. And the sound of the creek, long buried under ice, began to hum again as they approached. It wasn't far. Maybe 10 minutes through the narrow pass behind the cabin, then down a soft incline where the snow dipped around old rock beds. Warren didn't rush. The child didn't lag. They moved like they'd done this before in another life. And then, just past a half-frozen cedar stump, he saw them. Not clearly at first, but the shape was there. 2 tall figures just beyond the bend in the trees. Motionless, quiet, waiting. He felt it in his chest before he saw them fully. Not fear, not sadness. A pull, like gravity but softer. They weren't close. 30 yards maybe. Far enough to give space, but close enough to be seen. Their silhouettes blended into the timberline. Dark fur, long arms, wide chests. The heads turned slightly toward him as he stepped into the open. They didn't move, but they didn't disappear either. He stopped. Let the child go ahead. It walked without hesitation. Snow barely shifted beneath its feet, and when it was halfway across the clearing, it paused, looked back. Eyes met his. No fear, no confusion, just one last look. Then it turned again. Warren couldn't move. Couldn't breathe right. His fists were clenched around the scarf without knowing it. The child reached the edge of the trees, and one of the tall figures leaned down, slow, careful, until its hand gently rested on the child's shoulder. Not pulling, not claiming, just contact, reconnection. Warren's vision blurred. The second figure stepped forward now, a little closer than before. Taller than the first. Broader. Its arms hung low, fingers almost brushing the snow. It looked straight at Warren. He didn't run, didn't flinch. And then, something unexpected. The tall figure stepped past the others, just 2 paces, and reached out. Not toward the child, toward him, a hand, raised slowly, open palm. Not a threat, not a warning, just a sign. Warren's heart pounded so hard he thought he might lose his footing, but he didn't. He stepped forward, not all the way, just enough. And the tall creature stepped back, not in retreat, but in respect. A nod without nodding. And then its arm reached, gently, toward the child. And together they turned back into the trees. No sound, no crash of branches, just quiet, measured footsteps. The clearing emptied slowly, like a candle burning down, and then they were gone, not vanished, just returned. Warren stood in the snow long after the wind picked up again. The scarf hung loose in his hand now, damp from his grip. He didn't cry. Not out loud, but his body shook the way it does when grief passes through without staying. He didn't speak, didn't move until the sun crept sideways through the trees and spilled gold light across the snow. And in that golden silence, he breathed again. Walked home slow, scarf folded against his chest. Each step quieter than the one before, but not empty, not alone. There are goodbyes that hurt, and then there are the ones that heal while they break you. This was both. And somewhere behind him, in the place where the trees had once stood still, the snow had begun to melt just a little faster, as if something warm had passed through and promised to return. Summer didn't come with trumpets. It came slowly, like an old friend walking up the porch steps without knocking. First, the sound of water running stronger in the ravine, then the pine needles softening underfoot. Then, one morning, Warren Blake woke to birdsong, real, layered, uninterrupted birdsong, for the first time in what felt like years. And the air, though still sharp in the early hours, had lost that bite of winter. It just breathed. Light filtered through the tall windows differently now. Less blue, more gold. He stood barefoot on the cabin floor, feeling the grain of the boards under his heel like memory, the scarf still folded carefully inside the drawer by the fire, untouched. Since that morning, he walked back alone. He hadn't spoken much to anyone since. Not that there were many to speak to. May Whitlow had sent another letter come March, then again in April, asking if he was still up the ridge, if he needed salt or powder or a new fishing line. He never answered, but she kept writing. Left a jar of jam once in a basket under the woodshed overhang, as if she knew silence didn't always mean absence. Some people understand things without needing to hear them. Warren had moved slower those days. Not like a man broken, just someone who'd seen something sacred and didn't want to move too loud in case it left. He still chopped wood, still walked the line behind the ridge, still watched the sky turn from frost blue to soft heat. But it all felt different. Not hollow, not full either. Just settled. It was on one of those days, late July maybe, or early August, he couldn't tell anymore, that he walked into the trees without the axe, without the canteen, without the scarf. He didn't plan to. He just did. Woke with a pull in his chest and a stillness in his hands. Put on his boots, left the cabin door half-latched behind him. No fire burning, no note. He moved quiet through the first stretch of forest, passing the old rock where Leah used to stack pine cones like towers, then down the sloped trail where the creek's voice had thickened into a song. The moss was thick here now, green as paint and soft underfoot. He didn't look for tracks, didn't follow a map. His feet knew where to go. It wasn't far. Down past the split birch, across the shallow run where winter had nearly taken him, and then to the edge of the gravel bar where the sun always hit first in the morning. That's where he saw it. Not a shadow, not a figure, just a presence, standing maybe 30 feet away, on the opposite side of the creek, half concealed in the light. It was taller now, still slight in build, still small compared to the giants he'd seen once, twice, maybe, but older, shoulders broader, legs longer, hair thicker now, darker along the back and fading gently near the face. But the eyes, the amber eyes, those hadn't changed. The child. No, not a child anymore. Warren didn't speak, didn't wave. He just stood there, mouth slightly open, hands loose at his sides. The figure didn't step closer, didn't run. It reached down, slow and deliberate, and placed something on the flat stone by its feet. Then it stepped back, waited. Warren crossed the creek carefully. The water was low. Pebbles shifted under his boots, but he didn't stumble. He reached the stone, looked down. A piece of wood, smooth, carved, not a toy, not a weapon, a symbol. 2 lines, parallel, uneven, cut into the grain with clumsy but careful hands. He crouched without picking it up, stared at it like it might change shape if he looked too hard. 2 lines. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew what they were. Not a goodbye, not a message, a memory. He looked up again. The figure hadn't moved. It watched him, breathing slow, eyes steady. Then it stepped back, just 1 pace, then another, back into the trees. Not rushing, not afraid, just returning. Warren didn't follow. He stayed there on the gravel, crouched next to the stone, the carved wood still untouched between them. His heart beat slow now, full, like something had aligned. He didn't take the gift, didn't pocket it, didn't carry it back. He left it, right there. Like the scarf had been returned to him, this too had its place. And sometimes things only meant what they meant when they were left alone. He stood after a long while, straightened his back. The trees had grown taller since winter, or maybe he'd grown quieter. The walk home felt shorter. By the time he reached the porch, the cabin looked smaller too. He sat in the chair that afternoon with no fire, no food, no book, just air. just sky. The same way he had when he was waiting for her to walk again, when her fever finally broke, when the world turned soft for a moment. The scarf stayed in the drawer, but he didn't open it that night. Didn't need to. And somewhere out there, in the trees, in the rocks, in the space between roots and sky, something watched him too. Not close, not far, but there, like a promise, no longer a secret, just part of the land now, a chapter in its soil. And Warren understood what the forest had been trying to say all this time. Some things return, but they don't stay the same. And that's how you know they're real. Not because they remain, but because they remember you and keep walking. Sometimes what saves us isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with a roar or a miracle. It comes in silence, a small act of warmth in the middle of winter, a shared breath between strangers, or a presence that doesn't ask for anything except to be trusted. And it's in those quiet moments, where no words are spoken, that something old and sacred is passed between two beings, something we often forget in our rush to name and explain everything. The simple, instinctive choice to care. This story was never about who belonged to who. It was never about ownership or understanding in the way the world demands. It was about recognizing the fragile thread that ties one life to another and having the courage to hold it, even just for a little while. Because to carry another being through the cold is not weakness, it is the oldest kind of strength. And to let go with grace, when the time comes, is the highest form of love. The world teaches us to build walls, to be wary, to retreat into the safety of solitude. But life doesn't happen behind fences. Life happens in the quiet acts of giving, of noticing, of not turning away. It's in the mornings when you make space for something smaller than yourself. In the nights when you protect something fragile without needing to name it. And in the seasons when you choose, again and again, to soften instead of harden. We all carry scars. We all walk with ghosts. But sometimes healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like remembering differently. Not what was lost, but what was given. Not what hurt, but who stayed. And in that remembering, we learn to become caretakers, not just of others, but of our own tender, hidden places. There are those who say we must fear what we don't understand. But perhaps understanding was never the point. Perhaps all we've ever needed was presence, kindness, stillness, and a shared willingness to protect what's good, even if it doesn't look like us, even if it disappears into the trees when spring comes. So let this story remind us that there are connections in this world that transcend the visible, bonds that don't fit in books or cages or categories. The most powerful truths often exist between species, between silences, in the sacred space where no transaction is needed, only care. And maybe that's what it means to be human after all. Not to conquer, not to label, but to shelter what needs sheltering, to recognize the wild in ourselves, and to leave something better than we found it, even if no one ever sees it but the trees. If this story moved you in any way, if it reminded you of something gentle you've held or something sacred you've let go, I'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Stories like these deserve to be remembered, to be passed on, and to reach those who need them most. If you'd like to be part of that, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's keep building a community that believes in kindness, in quiet miracles, and in the beauty of the unseen.